Hello, this is Sana, and let's get ready to make a Battenberg cake. So some of you may have seen the Battenberg cake for the first time on the Great British Baking Show. Or others may have had it your whole life. Maybe your family is a bunch of cricket players. And why do I say cricket? For those who don't know, the history of the Battenberg is long, but has really been adopted by the cricketing community, who, in the actual rules of cricket, there is a break time to take high tea, and the quintessential high tea treat for cricket is a Battenberg cake. It's a beautiful cake. I've been making it for years and love the taste because it's got this wonderful almond marzipan plus cake in a striking pattern with great impact. So let's make a foolproof version. So I'm going to use two different cake mixes. Any type will do. I've decided today for red velvet, so that's a nice chocolatey flavor, and then strawberry. So you got a nice contrast. Just always think about having something that works together, but that also has a good contrast. Because what you really want to feel when you're tasting it is that wonderful marriage of a couple different nice flavors that work well together, and also that grid pattern that you see that has two contrasting colors. So make sure to think about those two things when you're thinking about which flavors and colors to choose. It's actually really simple to make. The easiest way of thinking about how to make them is to make them in loaf pans. So this is a kind of standard size loaf pans. If you have two, that's perfect, because we will just use half the batter from each of these, fill it up to about a third, then we'll be able to cut that into two blocks. So it keeps it really simple. Two loaf pans will do it for you. If you do not have loaf pans, you can also use more of a tray bake type of pan, or, you know, like in this case, this is a square cake pan. And then you can see what I've done with the parchment paper is just to fold it so that I've got two equal sized sections, and that way I could pour the red velvet on one side, strawberry on the other, use one pan, bake it all at once. We'll dump that out, cut it down the middle, and you've got 4 cakes, all of the same size. So the main thing is to have them all of the same size. If you want to use a full sheet pan, you could do the same trick with the parchment paper and just put in the barriers where you need them so that you get those same sizes. You want to just follow the directions for that cake mix. Normally all you'll need is perhaps eggs, an oil that doesn't have much flavor, or that has maybe a nutty flavor. So peanut oil is fine. I'm using safflower because it does not have much flavor. What you don't want to use is like olive oil or anything with a heavy flavor. And then the other thing you'll need is marzipan, and that's for the outside. And we'll first of all preheat the oven. In this case it's 350. So I've got the oven going and getting ready. I always then want to prepare my pans. Because it is a cake mix and uses oil, I'm actually just going to spray the pans. Keeps it simple. And in this case I'll use the loaf pans because that's the best method for getting even cakes. Make sure to put enough on so they don't stick, because part of this is the precision of getting really nice squares. So you really want it to pop out and look great. You could of course also line it with parchment paper if you prefer. Because I did decide to use 2 different cake mixes, I'll only be using half of each cake mix for the Battenberg. So what I could do is to make 2 and put 1 away into the freezer, because they do freeze well for about a month, so I could have one a couple weeks. But I've just decided to do a little something different. I've got a bundt pan here, where then I'll just use the rest of it and I'll put it in blobs in here. So we get some different colors of cake, and of course this will have a different baking time, but we've already got the cake mix, so it'll be really super simple to be able to make 2 cakes today. So I'm going to start with the super moist red velvet cake. They say to just start with the cake mix. 3 eggs. Small tip for eggs is I do recommend to crack them flat on a surface rather than on the edge of something, which you may have learned, just for health reasons, because you can introduce a little bit of bacteria if you are smashing it. Set that measuring cup on a flat surface so that you get exactly the right amount. Half a cup of vegetable oil and 1 1/4 cups of water. Now with any baking, baking is a science. You really want to be precise. So make sure to use the exact ingredients with the exact amounts. Do use measuring cups and measuring spoons, anything that you need to make sure to get the right mix. And then also, don't overdo. Follow the amount of time that they suggest for mixing. And really for a cake, because it's got flour in it, if you beat it too long, it'll almost become like bread-like. The gluten will start to string and things. Basically, that makes a tough cake. So we want to keep it nice and just put it together so that it's fully together, but then we're done. Mix that up. Don't be too worried about it either. And really get that mix going. Okay. Very good. So hand mixer, very easy. Now we've got our red velvet cake mix ready to go. I'll make the strawberry one in the stand mixer. I use the mixing attachment for a cake, so you don't want it to get too beaten up. That will extend the gluten strands and make your cake tough. Great. So now we've got our 2 cake mixes completely done. First we'll do the strawberry. Remember what we're using is just loaf pan, already greased. We'll fill that up just so that it will expand to become rectangular in shape. It'll be about half of the mix usually. So what we're really looking for is that this distance here, we're going to end up cutting in half. To make 2 squares. So basically half of this length is how high we want our cake to go up to the side. Now when it comes out, it probably will have a little bit of a mound. It will grow a bit, so allow a little bit of room for that, but basically use about half the cake mix. If you were using 1 cake mix at this point, you could just put it into into a bowl. Add some additional flavorings, add additional color, and then you would just be very efficient about using 1 cake mix and being able to have 2 different complementary flavors. So we've got the strawberry one finished, and now we'll use the red velvet cake. Now red velvet cake is a cocoa cake, and so it does have somewhat of a chocolatey flavor, but it's not very strong. It's kind of a real soft and just a real nice flavor. But I do like to add a little bit more. So just grabbing some chocolate chips. I like to use milk chocolate chips in the case of adding it to a cake so that it is still sweet. I could just dump them directly in, but even better is to put about half the bag in with just a pinch of flour, so a bunch of flour, a little bit of flour, just so that they're coated. And this way there'll be a little bit of flour on them now, and that will help them so that they don't sink. So I will just combine these now. You don't want to add it when it's with the mixer or the hand mixer. You do want to add it after, so that you can just fold those in, get them evenly distributed, and keep them that way. So we just add those in now, and then they're ready to go, and they shouldn't sink to the bottom. So we've got our other pan here. Again, adding about half of the mix into this loaf pan. We've got our 2 loaf pans now partially filled so that those will be ready for our Battenbergs. And we preheated that oven per the instructions, 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Key thing here is to take a look at the actual ranges that you'll find on the back of the cake mix to see how long should it go in. So you'll see a variety of 8-inch rounds, 9-inch rounds, bundt cake, and you want to get it in for the right amount of time. Now what we want to do here is that those are not very deep, and we want to think about that surface area is actually smaller. So I'm going to actually go to the lowest amount here, 25 minutes, and take a look at it then. And we'll do a check of it to see if it's ready. So now we've got the Battenberg cakes and the bundt cake in the oven, and we'll let those cook for about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and we'll check on those. Okay, so there's the timer. Time to check to see if the cakes are ready. I'll just take a toothpick. You could use any type of wooden skewers, really the best. A couple spots. Check in that spot. Oh, it is wet. So we'll put this back in and let it have about another 5 minutes, and we'll check it again. There's the oven now. There's nothing sticking. There's no evidence of batter of any type. Stick it in a couple of more spots. Looks ready to go. Perfect. So we've got our wire rack here now with the parchment paper and granulated sugar on the top. So now we'll just turn it out. And many times for cakes you may leave them in the pan, or you wouldn't need to flip them over, but we're going to make sure that we get that nice flat top. So we will flip that over, remove the pan, voila, nice and clear, and we'll just let that set, and it'll flatten the top a bit, get us a really nice shape ready for carving as soon as it's cool. We need to let those cool completely. We are going to be carving these, and if we cut them at all when they're warm, that you will not get that precision. So now comes the exciting part for our Battenberg. We've got our cool loaves, and they're ready to be cut and ready to be put together. So a word about how we actually put them together. We traditionally would use a glaze, so like an apricot jam or some sort of jam that you have handy, that you would warm up kind of thin a little bit, but not much, and strain it if it is one that has any types of seeds or skins or anything like that. And then you use that. So that's the most traditional, but really I think American style, and what's becoming more and more popular, is to use some sort of frosting. So again, since this is cake mix, really easy to make, we'll also use ready-made frosting, and we'll use this to actually stick the pieces together. So now let's get the cakes ready. We've got our 2 loaf cakes. They are completely cool to room temperature. And what we want to do is to make sure that we get that right in half. Now, depending on how confident you feel about doing it by eye, you may want to measure it out, or have at it doing it by eye. I am going to do it by eye here. As I said, I've made these quite a lot, but basically you cut that right in half. Now I've got 2 loaves, and they look fantastic. We also then want to make sure that they are square, and they are not square yet because we've got this kind of dome top. So it did flatten out a bit, but it didn't get fully flattened out. So we want to make that the square. So we'll be cutting that kind of bump off of the top as well. And now we've got good square shape of cake that we can use. We've done now both cakes. We even have a little bit of extra, so we can taste it make sure it's good. It is good, nice and tender. Okay, so the next step is to roll out the marzipan. And what we want to do here is I've just store-bought marzipan. Normally it comes in either a plastic or foil, tightly wrapped, and then you can just take this out and get it ready. To roll it out, and because it is sticky, instead of using flour, using some powdered sugar, just use that as if you were rolling out cookie dough. Just spread that out like you would rolling with flour, but instead with powdered sugar. So put that down on your surface, and then also a bit on top, and also a bit onto your rolling pin so that it doesn't stick. Now, you may want to save a bit of the marzipan out for decoration. If you want to color it in some other way, which I'm going to do. So I'm just going to take a little bit of it out at the moment, and then leave the rest in this big pack, and then roll that out. The important part here is to roll it out so it's thin, and that it will already be more or less the shape that we need. So what we need is a large rectangle. We need it to be as wide as our cakes are long, and then for it to fit around the outside of when the two cakes put together. So we'll make it just about as long as one of the cakes. Here, looks like it fits well, and then we'll try to get that as thin as it needs to be to get to that length. Now normally for a standard Battenberg, you're probably going to need a couple 100 grams or 7 to 9 ounces of marzipan, which should be more or less one package, or at the most it may be 2. You don't want it real thick because it does make the cake feel dry or heavy. You get too much of that marzipan. Just a nice thin layer around the outside feels very elegant and ready for high tea. Just do your normal rolling out method, which is, certainly making sure to turn it so that you're getting everything even. One tip I learned also is that you don't want to actually roll off the edge of it. Just roll right to the end and don't roll over, because the minute that you roll over, you're actually thinning the edges out, and then it becomes inconsistent. Okay, it's getting nice and thin. You can almost see through it. Just want to check that sizing again. So it needs to fit that way, and then also that there would be 4 of these all the way around. So a little extra there. Looks like I've got it. So let's assemble the cake. We have the marzipan rolled out nice and thin and the right size already. I'm going to use some of the frosting and just spread that nice and thin across this whole piece of marzipan. So now let's get started with putting those in. Now we want to keep it nice and square. So I like to use these hard edges to our advantage and keep them on the outside. So I'll start by just putting one right in place, and just so it fits on that area on the width of our marzipan. Then I want to take more of the frosting and cover just in a thin layer the other 3 sides. I'm now going to take the contrasting color, so in this case taking the red velvet cake and using that hard edge, putting that down beside it and sticking it together, lining it up very nicely, sticking it together using that thin layer that we already put on that original cake. Then there'll be 2 more layers that don't yet have the frosting on from that new cake, and we will just put a thin layer on those of our frosting again. Over that original strawberry one, I'm going to put another of the red velvet ones right on top of that. Again, keeping that harder, nice square edge toward the outside. Again, I'll frost the 3 sides now that I do see. Okay, so now we've got 3 of the 4 pieces. We're putting the last piece in place, and that just makes a nice now square. And now that we've done that, we're going to want to roll that marzipan up and around it. Ideally, you wouldn't move the cake at this point. You just fold that marzipan around it. So I'm pulling up this side first, and now I can pull this longer edge right on around it and over that top. And this side that's facing me now becomes the bottom because it's got that seam. The marzipan will stick nicely together, so just push that together nicely and then roll that over. And smooth the edges nicely, just with your hand. Now I'm going to want to decorate a bit more, so I'm going to move this off to the corner very carefully, letting it set. And I did save back some of that marzipan, so I'm just going to split the rest of what I've got into 2 different balls, and I'm going to color these. So I like to use gel colorants. You don't use very much, you get a really pure color, and especially in this case where I'm using red, it doesn't have that same kind of flavor that some of the more liquid ones will. But just you take a little bit of the colorant, put it into that marzipan, and then just start to knead it like dough until you get the color that you want. Little cookie cutter in the shape of a flower and one in a butterfly, and just going to use that dyed marzipan, which I've rolled out in the same way that I did before, and just cut some shapes out. Put these decorations onto the Battenberg. So I just use the remaining frosting and make little tiny dabs on the back, just real thin layer, so that they will stick. And here I've rolled a little bit of the marzipan, a little too thin so you can see through. So I'm actually just going to cover that up. That's another benefit of doing some decoration on the outside. So that was easy, and now we've got it decorated on the top and the sides, and we still have that kind of extra on the end. Now we don't want to leave it like that because part of the real beauty of a Battenberg cake is to actually see that, that checkerboard design. It's beautiful. And now we've got this end, and you can see the really nice checkerboard design on both ends, nicely decorated and ready to eat. Delicious. Enjoy making the Battenberg cake, and if you like seeing this, please hit the like and subscribe to the channel so you can see some more fun bakes.